came from the heavens, and one day they left. But why? Worshipped as gods, they built empires and shaped humanity, but a devastating conflict tore their world apart. Some say they vanished, others claim they will return. This is the untold story of the Anunnaki Exodus. There is a haunting thread that weaves its way through the myths and religions of every ancient civilization, a shared memory that transcends continents and cultures. It speaks of a time when gods did not reside in distant heavens or sacred scriptures, but walked the earth. They were visible, powerful, and present. They ruled over men, shaped the land, and left behind monuments that still defy explanation. In ancient Sumer, the land often regarded as the birthplace of civilization, this memory was not metaphorical. It was recorded, catalogued, and revered. There, on the clay tablets written in cuneiform, we find the names and deeds of the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came. These beings were not distant deities, but active participants in the affairs of Earth. According to the Sumerians, they founded the first cities, established laws, and taught humanity the arts of agriculture, writing, and astronomy. Every major advance of the early human story was attributed to the knowledge passed down by the Anunnaki. According to revelations from Sitchin's studies, the origin of these beings was not of Earth. They came from Nibiru, a distant member of our solar system with an elongated elliptical orbit that brings it into proximity with Earth approximately every 3,600 years. Life on Nibiru had evolved under entirely different cosmic conditions, and over time its atmosphere began to deteriorate. To restore it, the Anunnaki resorted to a solution they had long mastered, suspending gold particles in their atmosphere to form a protective shield. But gold was scarce on Nibiru. Their search led them to Earth, a planet rich in the precious metal. Led by Enki, the first Anunnaki team descended from the skies and splashed down into the Persian Gulf, establishing their first settlement, Eridu, home in the faraway. Over time, more arrived. They built cities in Mesopotamia and beyond. Nippur, the place of Enlil's command, Shuruppak, the city of Noah's forebear, and later Uruk, the shining seat of Inanna. Yet the mission was not without struggle. Mining gold in the harsh southern mines of Africa proved too difficult for the Anunnaki laborers. Discontent grew, rebellion stirred. According to the ancient texts and expanded by Sitchin in the lost Book of Enki, it was then that the Anunnaki made a monumental decision, one that would alter the destiny of the planet forever. Using their advanced genetic knowledge, they combined their own essence with the life forms of Earth to engineer a new being, the Adamu, the first Homo sapiens. Humans were not merely created for labor. They became entwined in the divine drama, participants, witnesses, and sometimes victims of the gods' ambitions and rivalries. The Anunnaki gave humans kingship from the heavens, taught them worship, and placed themselves as intermediaries between Earth and the divine. For thousands of years the Anunnaki ruled, but then they left. The question has echoed through time, unanswered. Why? What event or series of events led these gods to abandon the very world they had shaped? Was it foretold in the movements of the stars, a cycle written in celestial code? Was it the final act of a bitter war between rival gods, or perhaps the mission itself had reached its end, and with it, their reason to remain? The records hint at all three. As we search through the ancient tablets, the ruins of sacred cities, and the surviving myths passed down in every corner of the earth, we begin to uncover fragments of a forgotten history. A tale of cosmic conflict, forbidden love, betrayal, and destruction on a scale we are only beginning to comprehend. the story of the Anunnaki does not end with their arrival. It begins with their departure. But before that exodus, there was a time, long and luminous, when gods and men coexisted, bound by destiny and command. It was a time of sacred cities and divine order, when the Anunnaki reigned not from distant thrones, but from within the heart of Mesopotamia. The earth was their domain, and humans, their creation, lived beneath the shadow of their greatness. From the high platform of Ekur, the house which is the mountain, in Nippur, Enlil governed the fate of the land. As the supreme commander of the Anunnaki mission, Enlil wielded authority not only over Earth's infrastructure, but over divine law itself. His temple, described in the Sumerian texts as a stairway to heaven, was both a sanctuary and a control center, its ziggurat aligned to the stars above and the decrees of Anu, their king on Nibiru. To the south, in Eridu, the first city founded on Earth, dwelt Enki, the god of the deep abyss, master of wisdom and science. It was Enki who first arrived on Earth, who charted its waters and lands, who engineered the primitive worker to relieve the burden from the rebelling Anunnaki miners. In his temple, the Abzu, Enki housed not just priests, but repositories of cosmic knowledge, tablets containing instructions for civilization, technology, and genetic codes. Further north in Uruk, Inanna, also known as Ishtar, ruled with fierce ambition and celestial allure. A warrior goddess, she was not content with ceremonial titles. Inanna sought dominion, power, and adoration. She waged wars in the name of love and empire, and from her ziggurat, the Eanna, she oversaw complex rituals that connected the heavens to earth. The myths of her descent into the underworld and her celestial travels mirror the ambition and turmoil that defined the later era of divine reign. These cities were more than religious centers. They were operational nodes, part of a planetary-wide infrastructure. Temples functioned as communication hubs, linking Earth to Nibiru via sacred rituals and possibly even advanced technology. The priests were the human intermediaries, their chants echoing through the halls as encoded transmissions. The divine plans were carried out in stages, assigning regions to different gods, initiating the first monarchies, and overseeing the balance between human labor and Anunnaki objectives. Human kingship was not an invention of men. The Sumerian king list is explicit. Kingship descended from heaven. The gods selected human rulers to act as their representatives, shepherds, who were often half-divine, born of unions between gods and humans. These kings did not rule independently. They answered to their divine patrons and executed their commands in everything from law to temple building, warfare to irrigation. Yet this age was not without tension. The genetic manipulation that led to the creation of Homo sapiens, Adamu, was both a miracle and a dilemma. Enki had defied the assembly of gods when he pushed for intelligent life. The resulting species, crafted from the essence of Anunnaki and the clay of Earth, bore great potential, but they also carried the spark of rebellion. Their ability to learn, question, and eventually defy the gods became a threat to the divine order itself. That threat culminated in the event known across cultures as the Great Flood. As recounted in the Lost Book of Enki and echoed in the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was Enlil who, angered by humanity's growing noise and disobedience, decreed their destruction. A celestial catastrophe, a close approach of Nibiru or lunar shift, unleashed tsunamis and deluge. Yet it was Enki who secretly warned his faithful servant Ziusudra, instructing him to build a survival vessel. In doing so, Enki once again defied his brother, choosing life over divine retribution. The age that followed the flood saw both reconstruction and rivalry. The gods divided Earth into regions. Enlil retained Mesopotamia, Enki took Africa, Inanna claimed the Indus Valley, and Nanar, the moon god, inherited the lands of the Levant. But peace was never lasting. Old wounds resurfaced and new ambitions stirred. Divine quarrels turned into human wars, and the boundaries between mortal and godly vengeance began to blur. It was an era of beauty and brilliance, but also of manipulation and deceit. Mankind was caught in the middle of a celestial drama that would, in time, bring about the greatest of catastrophes and eventually the gods' retreat. But before their departure came the unraveling, the conflicts, the betrayal, the weapons of terror, and the silence that followed. Peace was never lasting. Old wounds resurfaced, and new ambitions stirred. Divine quarrels turned into human wars, and the boundaries between mortal and godly vengeance began to blur. This fragile balance could not hold. The final phase of the Anunnaki's dominion over Earth was marked by escalating rivalries, betrayal, and a descent into devastating conflict. The great houses of Enlil and Enki, brothers once united by mission, were now locked in a cold war that turned hot. Their sons, Ninurta and Marduk, became the embodiment of this divide. Ninurta, the warrior of Enlil's bloodline, sought to preserve the ancient order. Loyal to the protocols established from Nibiru, he upheld the division of dominions, the sacrosanct rulings of Anu, and the supremacy of the central command in Nippur. Marduk, however, was not content with his father's legacy alone. As the firstborn son of Enki, he saw himself as the rightful heir, not just to Enki's southern dominion, but to all of Earth. Marduk's ambitions grew alongside humanity's rise. His influence expanded across Babylon and into Egypt, where he became worshipped as Ra, the sun god. From there, he orchestrated moves that enraged the other Anunnaki. The construction of the infamous Tower of Babel, more than a symbol, a functional space platform, was a direct challenge to Enlil's authority. It aimed to rival the old launch sites of Sippar and Sinai. Enlil saw this not only as rebellion, but as a threat to planetary security. The project was halted. The languages of humankind were confused, the work scattered, and Marduk was sentenced to exile. Entombed alive within the Great Pyramid, according to some ancient accounts, where he remained until a cosmic sign permitted his release. But Marduk would not be silenced forever. His followers grew, and the earthly kingdoms began to reflect the divisions in the heavens. Inanna, once his ally, turned fiercely against him after being denied her share of dominion. Her revenge was merciless, and her thirst for power led her into political entanglements, even offering herself as consort to multiple rulers to extend her control. The gods no longer acted as stewards of mankind, but as contenders in a global struggle for control. This volatile situation reached its breaking point when Marduk, now returned from exile, declared himself supreme god and installed himself in Babylon. His rise posed a threat so dire that the Anunnaki Council convened, a rare gathering of the most powerful deities. In a move that would change history, the Council sanctioned the use of a forbidden arsenal, the weapons of terror. They were not allegorical. These weapons were terrible in scope and unmatched in force. Modern interpretations, especially in light of ancient descriptions of heat waves, blackened skies, poisoned waters, and invisible death, strongly suggest nuclear-level technology. The executioners were chosen: Nergal, lord of the underworld and commander of advanced weaponry, and Ninurta, Enlil's relentless warrior. Their targets were precise: the spaceport in the Sinai Peninsula, the Canaanite cities that housed Marduk's supporters, and the surrounding settlements loyal to his cause. When the weapons were unleashed, the earth trembled, the skies darkened. A blast wave of unnatural wind, a deadly radioactive force known in the texts as the evil wind, swept across the lands. Cities like Sodom and Gomorrah vanished. The once great city of Ur, home to kings and priests, was turned into a desolate graveyard. Survivors were struck blind, the rivers turned bitter, crops wilted into ash, and the climate itself shifted. This was not just a punishment, it was a rupture. The gods had gone too far. Their own domains were contaminated, sacred sites became haunted ruins, and worst of all, humanity, once loyal, reverent, dependent, lost its faith. What kind of gods would destroy their own creation? From this moment on, everything changed. The gods began to withdraw, temples were abandoned or fell silent. Divine interventions ceased. Nippur, the sacred city of Enlil, lost its voice. Enlil himself, devastated by the consequences of what had been sanctioned in his name, retreated from the affairs of Earth. The mission, to extract gold, to shepherd mankind, no longer held purpose. Marduk, undeterred by the destruction, claimed victory amid the ruins. From Babylon, he proclaimed himself ruler of gods and men, inaugurating a new age, one of human kings under divine influence, but without direct divine presence. The Anunnaki who remained would become increasingly distant, their appearances rare, their roles ceremonial. The gods had not yet left, but the age of their rule had ended. What followed was silence, and in that silence, the first steps of departure. As the dust of divine war settled and the evil wind ceased to blow, a heavy stillness spread across the ancient world. Cities once vibrant with divine presence fell quiet. Rituals continued, but they were empty of the fire and voice that once responded from the heavens. Statues remained in their sanctuaries, but the gods no longer inhabited them. Humanity, once subordinate, was now alone. And so began a new age, an era not of divine kings, but of mortal rulers claiming lineage from the heavens. The gods no longer ruled the cities of men. Instead, they watched from afar or left altogether, while humans, guided by memory and myth, began to forge their own empires. In Babylon, Marduk's chosen city, his name remained supreme. Though no longer visibly present, his priests preserved the rituals, upheld the ziggurat's flame, and passed down his decrees through the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic that cast Marduk as the creator god and supreme deity. This literary elevation masked the reality. The god no longer walked among them. Assyria rose in the north, fierce and militarized. Its kings proclaimed themselves the weapons of Ashur, who many scholars now identify with Enlil in a later form. But the wars they fought were driven by human ambition, even if cloaked in divine justification. In the west, Persia emerged. Under Cyrus and later Darius, the kings ruled not as avatars of gods, but as agents of a new cosmic order. Zoroastrianism, possibly influenced by Anunnaki echoes, spoke of a war between light and darkness, of cycles of time and a final reckoning. Yet even here, the gods had become conceptual, distant, no longer embodied on Earth. Temples that once served as centers of divine human communication slowly became mausoleums of memory. In Nippur, where Enlil had once dictated the destinies of kings, only broken tablets and buried chambers remained. In Uruk, Inanna's high priestesses continued her rites, but her chariot no longer lit the skies. What was left was tradition, practiced by priesthoods trained to keep the sacred fires burning, to recite hymns in fading dialects, and to perform rituals handed down without understanding. Festivals once attended by living gods became symbolic. Kings mimicked the divine embrace in temple marriages, echoing ceremonies that once bound heaven to earth. The divine memory did not fade, it transformed. The names of Enki, Enlil, Inanna, and Marduk were no longer spoken in the streets of Sumer, but their echoes lived on. migrating across cultures reshaped by tongues, traditions, and time. They were no longer gods who walked among men, but myths woven into scripture, archetypes concealed in religion. Whispers have long been heard in esoteric circles, rumors that Enlil, the stern and commanding overlord of the Anunnaki, may have re-emerged in later traditions as El, the high god of the Canaanites, or even as Yahweh in fragmented, evolving belief systems. Enki, the Wise One, lord of the Abzu, master of creation and genetic manipulation. Some suggest he lives on in the Egyptian god Ptah, the creator deity who shaped the world through word and design. Others see his signature in the water gods of ancient Greece or the clever serpent of Eden. Inanna, fierce and radiant, goddess of war and love, may have worn many faces: Ishtar, Astarte, Aphrodite, each a reflection of her divine duality, sensuality and wrath, creation and destruction, carried forward but never fully understood. Marduk's name echoed in Babylon, but in later ages, who did he become? Jupiter? Zeus? Or did his ambition fall into myth and warning? These are not certainties, but fragments, hints, symbolic fingerprints scattered across mythologies and religions that followed the fall of Sumer. The cuneiform tablets turned to scrolls, the ziggurats gave way to temples, and the torch of civilization passed fully into human hands. And yet something lingered. A yearning encoded not only in ancient stone, but in human memory. A recurring theme whispered in prophecy, from the tablets of Babylon to the visions of Daniel and Ezekiel, that the gods would return. That the bond between heaven and earth, once shattered, would one day be restored. But until that day, humanity would walk alone, ruling in the ruins of a world built by others. And in the shadows of fallen ziggurats and silent pyramids, where divine footsteps once thundered, only legends remain. But not all who lived in those fading days were left only with silence and stories. Some saw, some remembered. They saw them leave, on wings of fire. Even as the gods retreated from the world stage, a handful of ancient accounts preserve astonishing details. Details that suggest the departure of the Anunnaki was not merely spiritual or symbolic, but physical and observable. These are not myths handed down through generations, but first-person testimonies, eyewitness records inscribed by scribes and priests who lived through the gods' exodus. One of the most compelling comes from a priestess and royal figure, Adamu, mother of Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. In her autobiography, etched in stone and preserved in the Haran inscriptions, she describes her unwavering devotion to the moon god Sin, known to the Sumerians as Nannar, son of Enlil. She speaks of a time when Sin left his temple and no longer answered the prayers. For decades, the sanctuary remained dormant until a sudden, unexplained return brought renewed offerings and visions. Adagupi's texts strongly imply that Sin's presence was not metaphorical. He returned to Haran, perhaps briefly, and then departed again, this time for good. The language is unmistakable. Sin did not die, he departed. What does it mean for a god to return physically, then vanish? The answer may lie in another text, this one from the Hebrew Bible, specifically the book of Ezekiel. It is here that we find one of the most mysterious and technologically suggestive visions in all of ancient scripture. Ezekiel, exiled in Babylon, describes the arrival of a whirlwind coming out of the north, a great cloud with flashes of fire and brightness all around it. From within the fire emerged 4 living beings with sparkling metallic bodies and wheels within wheels, mechanisms capable of multi-directional movement. Above them was a crystalline platform and on it a throne. This was not divine metaphor. Ezekiel described a structured mechanical craft. He even notes the noise of its departure. the sound of great waters, like the voice of the Almighty, a tumult like the sound of an army. To ancient minds, it was a chariot of God. To modern ancient astronaut theorists, it was a spacecraft, an advanced vehicle used by the Anunnaki. And perhaps Ezekiel was witnessing not the arrival, but the final departure of these gods, ascending into the heavens just as they once descended. This interpretation gains strength from similar descriptions in Babylonian and Haranian records. In Haran, inscriptions refer to Sin and other deities as taking to the sky in times of turmoil, riding the divine boat of heaven. Babylonian astronomical omens describe lights moving against the stars, fires in the sky, and thunderous sounds that descend and vanish. These were not isolated events. They were documented patterns, repeated and recorded year after year by temple astronomers whose sacred duty was to watch the heavens for signs of the gods. And the signs they saw were not stars, they were departures. In every culture touched by the Anunnaki legacy, there lingers the image of gods vanishing into the sky, not through death, but through ascension. The Mayans, too, spoke of Quetzalcoatl leaving by sea or sky, promising to return. The Egyptians remembered Ra sailing across the stars on the solar bark. In India, the Vimanas, the flying palaces, disappear into the clouds. And in the oldest layers of Mesopotamian lore, the word Mu was used to describe the fiery sky vessels of the gods. They came with fire, they left with fire, and a few were watching when they did. The gods did not die, they left. To those who lived in the shadow of their retreat, the Anunnaki's exit may have seemed like a disappearance into the celestial unknown. But within the deeper layers of ancient records, a different picture emerges, one far more calculated, far more structured. The Anunnaki had a plan, and it involved more than simply vanishing into the stars. According to the ancient Mesopotamian texts, the Anunnaki did not depart Earth in a single leap back to their home planet. Instead, they utilized an interplanetary staging system, a cosmic layover point. That way station was Mars. In the distant past, Mars, known to the Sumerians as Lamu, was not regarded as the barren wasteland we know today. The texts and traditions suggest it once harbored water and an atmosphere suitable for operations. The Anunnaki, in their advanced technological era, established a forward base there, a midpoint between Earth and the distant reaches of their celestial origin. From Mars, cargo and personnel could be transferred, shuttles launched, and long-range voyages initiated with greater ease, avoiding Earth's denser gravity and atmospheric drag. This theory is echoed in the epic narrative of Enki and the World Order, which describes stations of the gods between heaven and earth, functioning like cosmic checkpoints. Sitchin suggests that Martian facilities, complete with structures, landing pads, and possibly even a command post, served as the final departure point for the Anunnaki. But Earth itself still held the remnants of their operations, and in one location, the clues are so clear, so geometrically deliberate, that they defy any purely terrestrial explanation. Nazca. High in the arid plains of southern Peru lies one of the most mysterious archaeological phenomena on Earth. Vast geometric lines, shapes, and figures etched into the desert floor, many only visible from the air. Perfectly straight lines stretch for kilometers, intersecting in patterns that seem far too precise for the tools of pre-Columbian cultures. Giant geoglyphs of birds, monkeys, and humanoid figures accompany what appear to be runway-like tracks, flattened, scorched in some areas, and devoid of any erosion despite thousands of years of exposure. To traditional archaeologists, these are ritualistic pathways, meant to be walked in spiritual ceremony. But to Sitchin, and to many others who dare to interpret the signs from the sky, they are something far more advanced, a spaceport. Sitchin proposes that Nazca functioned as a launch site in the Western Hemisphere. Its isolation, elevation, and vast visibility made it ideal. The area's lack of rainfall preserved the markings for millennia, almost as if it were designed to be seen from above. Could this have been one of the Anunnaki's final exit points? This theory is further supported by global mythological echoes. Ancient Andean legends speak of sky beings who taught mankind knowledge and then disappeared westward, promising to return. The most notable is Viracocha, a bearded, white-skinned god who came from the sea and departed across the Pacific, promising one day to return from the same direction. And in the Sumerian texts, the direction of departure is often mentioned as westward, from the lands of Magan and Meluha, known today as parts of Africa and perhaps even the Americas. Is it possible that the Nazca Plains, aligned with celestial markers, flattened with unknown technology, and etched with coordinates visible only from high altitude, served as the western spaceport of the Anunnaki? Could the gods who ascended from Ur, Haran, and Sinai have converged here at the edge of the world to await the final shuttles to Mars, and then to Nibiru? The stories, the symbols, and the science all point to one unsettling and thrilling conclusion. Their departure was not an escape. It was a departure by design. A cosmic withdrawal along the ancient paths they had carved into earth and sky. And Nazca, it may still bear the tracks of their final steps. But once those steps vanished into the sky, once the rumble of departure faded from the mountaintops and deserts, a terrible silence fell upon the earth. Their temples were silent, their cities abandoned. The divine fires that once burned atop the ziggurats no longer flickered. The sacred hymns, once performed with purpose and answered with signs from the heavens, now echoed unanswered through empty sanctuaries. What had once been a planet of guided order, meticulously ruled by celestial decrees, was suddenly rudderless. Civilization did not collapse, but it changed profoundly. Without the presence of the gods to enforce the laws of Enlil or instruct through the ME tablets of Enki, the burden of governance fell solely to human hands. Rulers, once appointed through divine signs, now rose by conquest or inheritance. The divine blueprint, once enforced from Nippur or Ur, was now a relic. In its place grew a patchwork of new powers, kings, warlords, and empires, each invoking the names of the old gods, but lacking the divine presence that once sanctioned their authority. The priesthoods, once intermediaries between man and God, filled the vacuum with ritual and myth. They preserved the rites, maintained the temples, and recited the old stories, but the connection was broken. The divine-human link had been severed. Memory became religion. History became myth. The golden age of the Anunnaki gave way to the twilight of Mesopotamian civilization. The once great city of Ur, where the last known human anointed king under divine patronage, Ur-Nammu, once ruled, eventually succumbed to drought, economic collapse, and foreign invasion. Nippur, the city of divine decrees, faded into the dust. Eridu, the first city, was swallowed by the sands. The cultural shift was unmistakable. In the absence of gods, empires rose to reinterpret the divine will. Babylon maintained the name of Marduk as supreme, but the real influence of his presence was gone. The Assyrians resurrected the war god Ashur, perhaps a reinterpretation of Enlil, but turned his legacy into one of relentless conquest. In the West, the Hittites, Phoenicians, and eventually the Israelites inherited fragments of the Anunnaki legacy, embedded in language, ritual, and theology, but disconnected from the living beings that once walked among them. And so, in time, the gods became legends. Enlil transformed into the thunderous and invisible god of storms. Enki's memory fragmented into the water deities of various cultures, Ea in Akkad, Poseidon in Greece. Inanna became Ishtar, then Astarte, and finally Aphrodite, her warlike nature forgotten, her sensual image preserved. But something vital was lost. Humanity was no longer part of a grand celestial mission. Beings once seen walking among humans were now spoken of in metaphors and sacred texts. The calendar systems that once marked the return of Nibiru faded from use. The star maps became constellations of myth rather than maps of divine traffic. The knowledge once granted to humanity of genetics, agriculture, astronomy, and timekeeping remained, but the teachers had departed. Earth had entered an age of mourning. And yet, had they truly left? Whispers from sacred scriptures suggest otherwise. The Bible speaks not of a single God, but of councils in heaven, battles among divine beings, and the mysterious sons of God, who descended to earth and took human wives. Jesus, the figure at the heart of Christian faith, declared, "My kingdom is not of this world," a phrase that echoes ancient truths about celestial domains beyond earth. In Islam, the Prophet Muhammad was said to have ascended to the heavens in the year 620, taken by a radiant being to a place among the stars. Was it merely spiritual or something more tangible? In one of the most enigmatic modern accounts, the apparitions of Fatima in Portugal, especially the third and most secretive revelation, spoke of a blinding light descending from the sky. Tens of thousands witnessed what was described as a miracle of the sun, a phenomenon that defied natural explanation. Similar appearances of lights in the sky, sometimes interpreted as angelic, sometimes extraterrestrial, have been recorded across cultures and centuries. Even in the foundations of newer belief systems, such as the Book of Mormon, visions of radiant beings descending from the heavens recur. Divine messengers, beings of light, transmitting lost knowledge and revealing ancient truths. Perhaps the ancient gods never truly departed. Perhaps they remained, hidden, watching, guiding from behind veils of religion, mystery, and myth. Their presence fragmented, their influence cloaked in sacred texts and celestial omens. Earth had entered an age of mourning, a mourning not just for the gods but for certainty, for direction, for the presence that had once walked in the cities, sat on the thrones, and guided the destinies of men. And yet, in every corner of the ancient world, a promise was whispered, a memory encoded in prophecy. They would return. One day, the bond would be restored. At the end of the age, the gods would descend once more. But before that could happen, Earth would have to pass through the silence of centuries, alone beneath the stars. Yet the silence was never total. Beneath the dust of forgotten temples and within the sacred texts of many peoples, the promise endured. The end of days is also the beginning. This belief that the gods would one day return is not confined to a single culture or civilization. It echoes across continents, carved into stone, whispered through prophecies, and preserved in sacred hymns. In the Sumerian texts, there is mention of the Day of the Returning Lords, when the Anunnaki would descend once more from the heavens to reclaim their dominion and re-establish cosmic balance. The term Nibiru itself, often misunderstood as a simple planetary reference, originally signified the crossing, a celestial marker whose reappearance signaled great change, renewal, and sometimes destruction. In the Hebrew scriptures, the concept of Yom Yahweh, the Day of the Lord, heralds a time of divine reckoning and intervention. The prophets Isaiah, Ezekiel, and Zechariah spoke of signs in the skies, wars among nations, and the return of divine figures to restore order. In Christian eschatology, the return of the Messiah is foretold as an event of immense cosmic power. The book of Revelation describes the sun darkened, stars falling from heaven, trumpets sounding, and a figure descending from the clouds, imagery that mirrors earlier accounts of divine descent. Islamic tradition speaks of the Mahdi and the return of Isa as precursors to the final judgment. The Quran describes a dramatic celestial upheaval, skies torn open, stars scattered, and the earth reshaped, pointing again to a time when the heavens will reveal what has been hidden. Across these traditions, there exists a shared pattern, the belief in an ancient return, a great reckoning tied not just to moral judgment, but to celestial alignment. Ancient civilizations understood time differently, not as a straight line, but as a cycle, measured in ages, not centuries. Each age marked by the shifting position of the sunrise on the day of the spring equinox through the 12 signs of the zodiac, completing a great cosmic cycle every 26,000 years. The age of Taurus saw the dominance of the bull cults, linked to Enlil. The age of Aries brought forth the ram and a new order of priesthood. The age of Pisces, symbolized by the fish, brought messianic teachings and the birth of modern religions. Now, we stand at the threshold of Aquarius. And with every transition between these ages, history records upheaval, natural disasters, societal collapses, and the reappearance or departure of divine figures. The Deluge, the Tower of Babel, the fall of Ur, each a marker, each a turning of the celestial wheel. And now, in the early 21st century, we again feel the stirrings of something vast. Environmental chaos, global unrest, political fragmentation, spiritual emptiness, and in the skies, space agencies report anomalies, irregular gravitational forces hinting at a massive object far beyond Pluto, something moving, something approaching. Modern technology scans the stars. Scholars revisit the tablets. Prophecies once dismissed as myth now seem to align with unfolding events. Will the gods return? Some believe they never truly left, that they dwell among us, hidden in plain sight, influencing from the shadows. Others await a moment, unmistakable and powerful, when the sky itself will split open, and the ancient ones will descend in fire and brilliance. And all the while, the clock ticks, toward something, toward a return, toward the day when memory becomes reality, and the Anunnaki walk the earth once more. Not as legend, but as destiny fulfilled, as the story begins again. And if you want to unveil this mystery, if you want to understand what the return of the gods truly means, this is your next journey. The next video is ready. Click here to watch the return of the Anunnaki.